Welcome to the Top Order podcast, coming to you from two continents. Our returning samurai Baldy back in the building. We're going to talk England versus India's first two T20 internationals. We'll talk a little bit of Australia cricket, both the Sri Lanka tour for the men and the women's Ashes, all over within the first week or so of the schedule. We'll also talk about whether or not there should be a New Zealand team in the Big Bash. All coming up on the Top Order podcast. Stay tuned.
It's not just me.
We've got the returning samurai on the swish, and he's actually introduced the wrong button on the.
It's the same button.
Do you want to start again?
It's the same button. No.
Oh, that's so good. That's
the
so
same
good.
button. It's the green button. It's always been the green button. No. Let's continue on.
No, this is
Don't edit
great.
that out.
We're definitely not editing this out because I've taken so much grief for my terrible intros, button pushing. This is staying.
Let's not draw any more attention to it, buddy. I think we've got away with it. The four of us on the pod this morning. So Raj not with us. We've got a little bit to get through, and we always sort of say this. The schedule on the run sheet looks like we should be a 30-minute podcast, but we'll see in an hour or so's time whether that's true. Let's start with England, India men. So. I guess, Jamie, I'll come to you first. The Brendan McCullum white ball reign has started with a little bit of a damp squib. 2 defeats in the first 2 T20s. Chennai, the second one last night. And it's a 5-match series. So, they'll say, we've got our feet on the ground. We're focusing on the next game. We believe we can win this 3-2. But, yeah, your first impressions of this reign, which, let's be honest, has got a little bit of McCullum stamped on it, hasn't it, in terms of some of the selections, getting a number of the red ball players into the side. But what have you made the first couple of games at Eden Gardens and Chennai?
Well, first of all, I got my team selection completely wrong, so that's why I'm not involved in any of that sort of stuff. I guess Overton kind of coming in last week, I don't think we saw that necessarily, kind of gone for kind of a bit of a mixture of medium pace, spin, the all-rounders. Obviously, Root still playing T20 in South Africa, so not involved. I think the top order was pretty much as we kind of had it. It would appear that, Duckett and Salt have struggled, it's fair to say, and then your best mate Livingston again probably not ripped up too many trees coming further down the order. Buttler probably showing, his familiarity with playing in India and those conditions has probably held stuff together for England. It just feels a little bit like a test in the water. And again, we chatted about this last week around McCullum probably just coming in and trying to find his feet a little bit with it. I think team selection for game 3 will be interesting. Obviously had Atkinson in the first game, and then Bryson Carse has come in for the second game with Archer and Wood and so forth. So it's kind of like, do they keep with those or is there going to be rotation? It seems to be a little bit of a licorice all sorts, I think. Just trying to figure it out a bit. Like, Overton, medium pace, bit of spin with Rashid, bit of pace, rather than, I kind of went gung-ho and just went, right, let's just go rapid and spin. That was my sort of binary way of looking at this stuff. So, it feels a little bit like, a bit of a sort of feasibility testing, pilot testing at this stage before he really kind of works out, his key strengths. But, I don't know what you've made of it, Binksy.
Yeah, I, much the same, to be honest, Jamie. I think that the confusing thing for me is we've used Buttler either in the finisher role at, sort of 5 or 6, and then more recently he's been at the top of the order. They've taken the gloves off him. And I honestly don't know whether that was, his call. I think it's de rigueur now that, your skipper is at mid-off and he's involved every ball, and it's going to be pretty difficult to do that, particularly when you've got Jofra Archer sending down rockets and you're probably 50 metres away from the top of his mark. But it seems weird that ultimately your best player in the format isn't probably playing in the role that allows him to be the best player in the side, which for me is going to be at the top of the order. And look, I don't know how you square that circle when you've got Phil Salt and you've got Ben Duckett and the personnel that they've got. So that seems a little bit strange for me. From a bowling perspective, I'm not less concerned, but sort of less worried about the way that that's played out, because I think that these are the right guys. They've just got to figure out what the combinations are. I think that, the issue that we probably do have to a certain extent, you look at comparison with India, and we've talked about their strength in depth a hell of a lot. We've got one gun spinner. And let's be honest, we've probably really only got one gun spinner in the whole of English cricket at the moment, that would be in and around any other teams, white ball squads. Adil Rashid, obviously, we're talking about. So there's a strength in depth perspective there from a spin point of view. Even unfair to compare that against India, because they've just got so many. They've got so many options. But look, it is a little bit of, I suppose, as you say, a test balloon for England. So it's not super important, but I think it is about creating the ethos in the side for the T20. For the Champions Trophy, which obviously isn't the same format, but it's going to be largely the same guys that are involved. And then the final thing, really, Jamie Overton's selection just puzzles me. He's not in the best 7 batters, and he's not in the best 4 bowlers. Baldy can run me some stats, but he's probably not in the best 77 all rounders either. So that's a puzzling selection just from a quality point of view. Stu, Baldy, I don't know if you've seen too much of it. Don't want it to become too England centric, but a pretty inconsequential bilateral series, probably from a neutral's view, isn't it?
Look, I would be remiss though, as the leading Sunrisers Hyderabad fan here in New Zealand, chairman of the Orange Army over here in New Zealand, if I didn't talk about Abhishek Sharma though, that first, even in the second game he played. It's amazing. I just sort of stunned when I watch him, because he's a kind of batter who half the time when he hits the ball, I think, oh yeah, that's gone straight up. He's out. And then it just sails over the rope for 6. And he just seems, he's like, he did it all in the IPL. He's done it for the last couple of years really in the IPL, but last year in particular, it just paid off. He just plays absolutely without fear. Some of the shots that he played, just remarkable. So awesome for India. And I guess continuing on in there, when we talked, I think at the end of last year, about their T20 form and just how ridiculous it is, really, in a game that, in a format that feels like you can just lose by someone turning up, someone putting on a good performance, you lose. They've just got a remarkable, run of victories now that just keeps piling on, and because of that depth that you just talked about, Binksy.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I just wanted to come back to the England team quickly before we move on. The fascinating part in an otherwise not so fascinating tune-up to a white ball format that's not the format that we're playing is where England are going with their finishing players. So they've tried Jacob Bethel, I think, at number 6, 7.
Yeah.
Selectors seem to love Jamie Overton. I'm with you, Binksy. I'm not quite sure why. We've seen Jamie Smith at number 6. I think that combination is the thing that I've got my eye on for the rest of the series, because I think England really need to nail that going into the Champions Trophy. I expect that Joe Root will come back into that squad for the Champions Trophy, and he'll factor into their calculations around their best 11. But how they balance their side, given that Phil Salt can also hold the gloves, Jos Buttler can hold the gloves, and Jamie Smith can obviously keep very well as well. The balance of that 5, 6, 7 for England in their engine room and their finishing in the ODI space is going to be the thing that I'll be looking out for the rest of this series.
But Baldy, the thing for me before we close off on it is we play so little domestic 50-over cricket that the only way England are going to be able to go with this, unless they move, and they're not going to do this, and I don't think they should do this, unless they move Buttler to that kind of finisher role at 5, 6, wherever you want that person to be, they might float to a certain extent based on game situation in the 50-over game, is they are backing Liam Livingstone, who, has been good this last 12 months from a stats perspective. There's no doubt about that. And they're backing the fact that Harry Brook, albeit not a lot of experience, is going to be able to navigate that. But I think that 50-over cricket is so dependent upon knowing your role and having been in similar situations a number of times before to know how to navigate it. It's different to T20 cricket because you do have to think about it a little bit more. So yeah, I think that's the worry really, is that they just haven't got the muscle memory of what to do when we're 40 for 5 versus what to do when we're 220 for 4 with 15 overs to go, or whatever those game situations are. So that's my worry, is that we haven't got enough time to probably tune that up.
And I don't think it's necessarily. Sorry, I don't think it's necessarily setting that's going to be England's problem. I think it's going to be chasing.
I
think it's going to be. We need 80 off 10. We need 60 off 9 on a difficult deck. I think those are the MS Dhoni, Michael Bevan type of situations. They're the things that I think we need to see, and we're not going to see it in T20 cricket because there's less time and less balls and whatever. So it's going to be a fascinating lead up to the Champions Trophy and how some of these one day sides shake out that haven't played much one day cricket in the last 18 months.
Jamie, round us out on that.
Well, I'm just thinking about the Jamie Overton selection. What that probably does indicate is that he's probably going to play in the 50 over stuff because giving him a bit of prep time, because I guess the potential he does have is to bowl cutters and slow ball bouncers and stuff like that. So I guess that's probably has one eye on him playing in the 50 over. But like you folks, it's kind of a confusing one. I think as well, the time issue, it's an obvious thing to say, but you get more time in 50 overs. So therefore, if you're not used to that, you can just be used to just, 20 over, smash it without really too much planning necessarily. I think that's going to be interesting in that first 50 over game. And just the last point about the strength in depth, should Rashid get injured, that bowling lineup looks fairly limited.
Yeah,
in terms of a mix-up, like you're then asking Livingston, you're asking Root potentially, to step into that role, and with the greatest will in the world, that they're not, your world-class spinner, are they? So
no. Well, let's move and talk some brighter news for England cricket. We've got the Women's Ashes happening at the moment, so. Obviously, we've had the warm-up games of the ODIs and the T20s, and now really what we're there for is this one Test match to claim the moral victory, regardless of.
That's how you get it.
Yeah, regardless of the points. But look, joking aside, a tremendously dominant performance from the Australian ladies through the course of this Ashes series. England really haven't been at the races at all, and we were just talking off air quite extensively, but probably the gap between, it isn't just these two teams, is it? It is the gap between Australia and probably everybody else in the women's game at the moment. They are just so much better than anybody else. And Stu, I know you're going to throw I know you're going to throw that into the mix, and but yeah, in terms of the last sort of 3 or 4 years, there's an argument to say that Australian ladies team is probably the most dominant in world sport, let alone just world cricket. But yeah, Baldy, you've got bragging rights really to talk about being 6-0 up in a 7-match series.
Yeah, it's an interesting one, isn't it? Because we go back to the last series that Australia played. Australia was 6-0 up. England fought back, drew the Ashes, probably had the moral victory over in England at that point. Australia had to go away and lick their wounds after that series because I think they would have expected to win and win well. They didn't. Australia went away and learnt their lessons and, made the adjustments, made the changes, identified some cricketers that they wanted to bring back and combat this England side that did really, really well in the last Ashes series. And they've done all of that. They brought, double leg spin to just about every game. They've unlocked Georgia Vole, who was a tremendous talent. They've put Phoebe Litchfield in a position to succeed at number 3. They've identified the things that they need to change to execute their cricket better. And over the course of the last 6 games, both the ODIs and the T20s, Australia have executed their cricket ruthlessly, absolutely clinically. And despite the odd drop catch here and there was a sitter that Georgia Wareham dropped last night in the last T20 at deep mid wicket. But other than that, Australia have executed their skills superbly. On the other hand, England have not executed their skills nearly as well. A lot's been written about the physical fitness of the players. A lot's been said about, the difference in terms of preparation. Culturally, even John Lewis, the coach, came out and talked about the different cultural, physical attributes of Australian culture and England culture. But whatever you want to say about the physical side of things, the Australian team executed their skills under pressure better than England across this series in every single game. To me, the difference is not a physical difference between England and Australia. It's not even a talent difference. England have talented cricketers to match it with Australia, but under the highest of pressure, Australia executed their skills brilliantly, and you watch those England players go out onto the field almost looking like they're in headlights, because as soon as the ball went up, there was a little bit of confusion. As soon as the shot selection came under pressure, England's shot selection was poor, and they were rolled as a result. Now, Australia executed their skills and their plans beautifully. They picked double leg spin, and that was their attack. They bowled hard lengths to England and made them hit over the top of the infield, and a lot of players were caught in the edge of the circle. But under pressure, Australia, just the skill execution is still there, and it seems to be getting better and better. As Lanning retires and as we lose Alyssa Healy a little bit and Elise Perry gets a little bit on into her career, all these other players, McGrath, Sutherland, Gardner, Vole, everyone steps up a level when they get into that Australian jersey. And other than a couple of performers for England, we haven't really seen that in this series. And now they've got the biggest of stages, MCG Test, under lights, to come back and prove that they are as good a cricket side as they believe that they are. Because if they give Australia a sniff over 4 or 5 days and 2 innings, Australia will take them to the sword, because they've been absolutely clinical so far in the series.
Yeah,
I don't know where we go from there, because it's just been an absolute clinic.
Yeah, it's been an absolute clinic. I think a couple of things I'll pick up on, and then maybe Jamie can pick apart my analysis to an extent. I didn't see the comments from John Lewis about the cultural differences. So, yeah, I got a box of Cadbury's celebrations for Christmas. It sounds like he got a box of Cadbury's excuses in his Christmas stocking. But I think the other factor for me, Australia have done it with some of their bench strength. Alyssa Healy, probably, one of the greatest players in women's cricket over the past 10 years, not present for most of the series. Beth Mooney has been absolutely awesome for Australia. I don't think she's had a failure, or maybe one failure out of the 6 games so far. I think the other thing, Baldy, is, and you do this pretty well, right, as a nation, you target the better players in the opposition side, because you believe that just sort of destroys that sort of confidence. And Heather Knight's had an okay series, but, Nat Sciver-Brunt, you've kept really, really quiet. Maya Boucher, who had, burst onto the scene, you've kept really, really quiet. And then, okay, Ecclestone's been pretty decent with the ball, but you probably haven't allowed her to settle the way that we've allowed your spinners to just dominate us through the course of the series. So you've kind of really taken those sort of key players for England and put them under pressure, and by doing that, you've put the other girls under so much pressure, as we've alluded to, in terms of some of that rabbit in the headlights comment when the ball goes up in the air. But yeah, absolute clinic, and yeah, congratulations, you have got the actual and moral victory for this already, regardless of what happens at the G. So yeah, heard it here first.
Seems a classic Australian strategy, doesn't it? And we've seen this before. We've seen the parallels with the men's Ashes team. It's really, really difficult once it kind of gets on this kind of roll and this momentum. That strategy of kind of destroying from within. It's kind of like you target the strongest players, and if they kind of go back in their box, go into their shell a little bit, it then seems to cascade and spread like wildfire to sort of everybody else within the team. And that seems to have appear what has happened here. Targeting your really strong players then just impacts everybody else. And I think it does spread very, very quickly. We talk about momentum in sport a lot, and of course positive momentum, but this is another situation in world sport of negative momentum, where the opposition are just kind of overpowering. There's probably an increase of mental effort and I don't mean that disparagingly, but you know, the mental effort in terms of the Australian players are playing so confidently that they're trying things, they're invested, you know, that they're enjoying it. There's more positive energy that's coming out there. England is probably, you know, kind of like survival mode. Let's just get through this. Let's try and find a way. And it's kind of like that shift in momentum, I think, is really, really difficult to change. You know, I'd like to be optimistic about the Test match, but crikey, you know, you'd be pushing me, I think, if I could see anything but an Australian victory.
I think the classic formula, though, I think you guys mentioned it on the podcast while I was away on holiday. It's both openers and the captain and the spinner. That's who Australia have really targeted. And you've seen it in the analysis that we've just talked about, right? They've targeted the openers. The openers haven't had a brilliant series, you know, maybe a little bit up and down. They've targeted Eccleston. You know, they've really gone after England's spin. England have got good spinners in this series, but Australia have really targeted them. So, you know, it's going to be a very, very uphill battle, I think, for England to be competitive in this Test match. They're going to have to... It actually becomes really simple for them. England have to win session 1 on the first day. They have to be in front at session 1, at the end of session 1 on the first day. If Australia have their noses in front, then I think it's good night, Nurse. It's good night, Irene. England must stay in the Test match as long as possible and then find somewhere from within that playing 11 a match-winning performance from some unlikely character. I think if they rely on the big names to deliver on the big stage, Australia will wear England down, and they will find from some of their, you know, not as well-known players, they will find a match-winning performance from an Annabelle Sutherland who's been quiet, or a McGrath, or a Gardner, or a Megan Schutt, or a Darcy Brown. You know, those players have stood up over the course of the series. England are going to have to find somebody to actually take the aggression to Australia, to take the game to their opposition. If they just sort of try and sit in for too long without being aggressive, I think Australia will roll England. So, look, girls, get aggressive. That's the only way you're going to beat Australia in Melbourne, I'm afraid.
Well, and I think, you know, the only thing I'll add from a neutral point of view is it's been a bit of a downer from a neutral point of view because, you know, I think back to that last series, there was actually a huge amount, it felt like there was a huge amount of buzz around the women's game, which was awesome. And there was all this talk of, you know, because of the tightness of the series, there was a lot of talk around, you know, I could see in New Zealand, everyone was saying, oh, can we get some tests? Can we, you know, let's get some tests for the White Ferns, all of that kind of stuff. I've hardly seen anything, you know, around since from a New Zealand point of view. I mean, obviously we've got our Super Smash going on. There's other things sort of happening in the New Zealand sphere, but, you know, whereas last time, I guess it was at a different time, it was in our winter. But even still, I think it's been a massive downer from, you know, the rest of the world to see this dominance from Australia and not a competitive series.
Yeah,
I think Binksy made a good point, though. I think, you know, we don't want to undermine the fact of how good this Australian team are across world sport. Like statistically, I think their win ratio over the last sort of 4 or 5 years has been phenomenal. Like that, they are a machine, and they are a bunch of extremely talented and well crafted individuals. And yeah, I think it would be remiss of us to probably sort of, you know, not emphasise that.
Yeah, and look, hopefully, Border, you mentioned the occasion, a day-night test under lights at the MCG, which, you know, I'm sure all the players have been looking forward to. Let's just hope, because I wouldn't be buying a ticket for day 3 at the moment. But yeah, let's hope that it is a competitive game, and I think it, you know, I want it to be a competitive game because I think it puts, you know, this team, this Australian team, on that kind of pedestal and on that viewing platform for people to see just how good they are. So you want it to be competitive so that, you know, you can see that clash shine through over the full 4 days of the Test match, hopefully. Let's move on, and we'll talk partly about Australia again. We've got, you know, David Warner in his audition for a return to the Australian captaincy and sideboarder, is leading a resurgent Sydney Thunder to the final of Big Bash 29 WrestleMania. Or whatever it is. But we've got, the Hurricanes and the Thunder in the final tomorrow, I think, the 27th. But the angle we're going to take is less about a preview of that final and more whether or not we should have a New Zealand team in the Big Bash. Lippy, I'll probably come to you first. Obviously, some parallels with outside of this podcast, one of your other big passions is the Warriors, obviously playing trans-Tasman elite level sport. So I'm guessing this has come from you into the Slack channel as a suggested topic. But why don't you kick us off with, I guess, your reasons for and against?
Well, it's come into the Slack channel because it's sort of a conversation that's resurfaced again here in New Zealand. Some comments that Chris Cairns actually made on, I think in a New Zealand Herald column that he writes, and on radio as well. And it just sparked it just sort of sparked that conversation again. I've seen the kind of for and against, and I suppose from when I see, when that comes out in the media, a lot of people are like, yeah, that'd be awesome. Let's get a New Zealand team in the BBL. Let's get a couple of teams. We should have a North Island team, a South Island team. Let's sort of make something of this. I don't see it. I just don't see what the point is. I don't see, why we would, how it would. I don't see how it would help New Zealand cricket. I don't see who is funding this. What it's not the same as, like, everyone, I guess, compares it as you did to the NRL or, even the NBL basketball or something like that.
Super Rugby.
Yeah, Super Rugby. But those are kind of long leagues. I think it almost comes back to the stuff that we talked about last week, Jamie and Raj, about sort of what cricket is becoming, I suppose, in the franchise windows. And the only reason I think you would do this is if you had particular franchise windows, and maybe you had three windows around the world, and you went, okay, well, the Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, summer one, it's at this time, and the BBL happens, and the SAT20, but there's so many, and I don't know. I suppose New Zealand has the Super Smash, right? And I don't know. We see the competition just doesn't get crowds. We saw the Black Clash, which for anyone who's not in New Zealand, that's the ex All Blacks play against the ex some old, the likes of Stephen Fleming and Daniel Vittori and Kyle Mills, and all, they come together and they have some exhibition players. Chris Gale just came in. We had some rugby league players come in and play, and there's actually some really talented rugby players that played first 11 cricket, played even played up to first class cricket. A lot of good rugby players. So it ends up being a decent-ish game, but it's very much a novelty. It's a show. Everyone goes there, but they pack it out. And, they packed out Hagley Oval, and you see that, and then you see a Super Smash game, which is, a much higher level of cricket. And, there might be a few hundred people there. And I suppose that might be the argument, because you flick over to the BBL and you see 18,000 people, 20,000, 30,000 people packing these stadiums. But I just don't know. I don't know. Baldy, does it help? Would it help New Zealand cricket in any way to have this?
I think it depends on whether or not you view there being a future in the Super Smash, and to what level of competition do you want to hold the Super Smash to. Gone are the days of Mahela J. Wardner and co, quality overseas players coming to play in New Zealand. I think those days are done.
It's going the other way, whereas New Zealand players are going to play in the other leagues,
exactly.
the SAT20, the IT,
Exactly.
ILT20.
So I think the future for New Zealand, if they were going to go down the Super Rugby route, and let's face it, it would be the only domestic competition that Australia would have a chance of winning against New Zealand. So I'm all for it from that perspective. But I think if you had 4 New Zealand franchises playing 8 Australian franchises, it's a 12-team tournament. Everyone plays each other once. You have specific weekends targeted in the calendar where you have local derby games. We've seen from the introduction of Auckland FC into the Isuzu A-League this season that rivalry sport in New Zealand, particularly between Auckland and Wellington or Auckland and the South Island, can put bums on seats. Auckland FC is putting bums on seats this A-League season. I think if there was an expansion in the NRL, particularly in the South Island, that would put bums on seats. I think that there is a genuine potential for New Zealand to uplift the level of T20 cricket in this country by joining the BBL. But they'd have to do it en masse. I don't think it's worth it just having one side and continuing to have the Super Smash. It would have to replace the Super Smash with 4 franchise cricket teams, which would be competitive against Australia. There are 4 very, very good franchise teams here in New Zealand worth of players. Now, unfortunately, for the teams, the players that would have filled those fifth and sixth teams, there's no opportunity there for them in
they're just
domestic.
kind of wiped out for the rest of that, or for the whole span of that
But again,
league.
If you think about what is the quality product that you're trying to put out there, and you think, okay, well, is 4 better than 6 from a quality perspective? I think about it like I think about Super Rugby in Australia. 5 Super Rugby franchises in Australia, way too many. We can barely afford to have 3 competitive rugby sides in Australia. I think there are 4 competitive, T20 teams in New Zealand. And if it's part of the BBL and those overseas players who make themselves available for the BBL draft, all of a sudden a Sam Billings is playing for Auckland or whatever the equivalent franchise is, then we might start to see some more bums on seats, because you're going to see a Sam Billings, or you're going to see a James Vince, or whoever. You might see Akil Hussain turn out for the Canterbury franchise, that kind of thing. So I think that potentially is the way forward for New Zealand, but I don't think it's going to happen in the next year or two.
Yeah. Mate, I had a couple of points, and then I think probably you've given me another one. I don't think James Vince and Sam Billings are going to get bums on seats. So I think that there's a conversation around the quality of the overseas players that would need to play in the Big Bash.
Good point.
Even that's diminished, I think, with other leagues. And what I'd say, I think is, I don't think New Zealand have got 4 franchises in them, and I don't think Australia and the Cricket Australia, I was going to say the ACB, I don't think that they would want that, that ratio of 8 teams and 4 Kiwi teams. It might be a couple, if it were to be viable. I think the other factor is the better New Zealand cricketers are getting gigs in the other franchise leagues around the world anyway. So I think what it would do is further dilute the Super Smash, which I still think you would then need to be able to give opportunity to the number of domestic cricketers that you've got here in New Zealand. What T20 would they play if you got rid of the Super Smash and replaced it with that Big Bash? Even if you had 4 teams, yes, you might then have your 44 best cricketers or whatever your squad sizes are, given that opportunity. But what about the other? I'll do the math. But how many franchises you got? 6 at the moment. What are the other 22 guys doing? They're not going to get. They're not going to get cricket. And then the final point I'll just make, Baldy. I think, and you may have a view on this, but the way that the Big Bash is covered, and I genuinely mean this. This is not a criticism. The way that it's covered, it is jingoistic, patriotic nonsense from Mark Howard and his merry crew. And I just wonder whether or not having a New Zealand team would kind of just change the way that product works. It's just so so parochial as a product that I wonder whether that would change the dynamic. And you go back to those tri-series, I don't think you would, with Australia A in those old tri-series, you got all the Australian public and punters rooting for the A team. I don't think you'd probably get that level of we're going to root for the underdog and root for the Kiwis. But I think it would change the dynamic of the Big Bash so much that I think it's a non-starter, to be honest.
Yeah, that's all good points. I mean, if we change the culture of the Big Bash by making it less of what you said, to me that's a good thing. Honestly, I think that's a good. I think it's a good thing.
I agree, but they don't see. I don't think they see it that way, and they are turning the tide now, aren't they, in terms of making money off the Big Bash?
Yeah, I don't. I think it's a great concept. I think having an Australian and New Zealand competition conceptually is great. I don't think it would work to replace the Super Smash, and if you don't replace the Super Smash, then the Super Smash would wither on the vine and die because none of the top New Zealand players, they'd all barely have enough time to play in the expanded ANZ BBL. They wouldn't play in the Super Smash, and then the Super Smash ends up becoming a second-class competition, which becomes problematic from all sorts of financial and crowd and all the rest of it perspectives. And I don't think New Zealand cricket want that. But New Zealand cricket need to find a way to create premier T20 competition for their domestic players that is a better standard than what we're seing now, or that's maybe not a better standard of cricket, but a better product that people will want to come and see. And whether that's trying to find their own window or trying to find, a novel way of encouraging overseas players or getting their best players to play in this competition as opposed to, Finn Allen and, Lockie and co playing in the BBL or wherever. That's the problem, I think, that this proposal is trying to solve effectively, is getting the best talent in New Zealand playing for a New Zealand-based franchise, if you like.
Yeah, and I look, if there wasn't the SA T20 or the IL T20, I think that this might have more legs, because then you could start saying, okay, well, you do have your window and you can set out, you can have this time for, you can run it in any way you want. I just think that this current way, you're going to have, the way New Zealand cricket's going, because of all these other leagues, again, we talked about it last week, Jamie, that the New Zealand contracts are geared more now towards letting players, like Binksy said, go and experience whatever leagues they want to and be able to get those opportunities. So I don't think that New Zealand's top players are missing out on that quality of cricket or anything like that. I don't think that, necessarily... Well, that's always the argument, right? That you say, okay, well, you bring in these players and it raises the standard of all the New Zealand players because you're bringing them in. I don't necessarily think that they need that because of the way things are going. So
I disagree. Mitch Hay needs that.
Maybe.
Like the Mitch Hays of New Zealand cricket need that level of exposure. Right?
A few of those guys, though, they need to perform in the Super Smash. They need to actually, there isn't that many that are going out and dominating the Super Smash. I
don't disagree with you.
Yeah.
And that is part of the problem, is that the guys in that tier below should be dominating those competitions. They should be putting up 700 runs. They should be getting 20, 30 wickets at an average of 13 and an economy rate of 5.5.
And you see Matt Henry come in, takes 5 for straight away. He looks a class above.
But he's already established.
Yeah.
The challenge is, how do you get opportunities for the Bevan John Jacobs, the Eddie Ashocks, the Mitch Hayes, those fringe players that need that exposure to a higher level of competition? How do you get those guys that level of exposure?
They can go and play in it already.
Yeah.
Go and play for the Thunder or the Hurricanes.
Well, they're going to play in the PSL.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to say there's so many options out there available. That they can go around the world, I guess. Probably one of the KPIs here is your national team, and if you're internationally you're competing and you're doing the best, then maybe that's the proof in the pudding. If that then starts to suffer, then you kind of then reflect domestically and say, do we need to do things differently, perhaps?
But it's too late though.
Yeah, possibly. Yeah.
By the time you think, oh shit, actually our national team bombed out of the Champions Trophy. It's 3-4 years that domestic scene has created that problem in the first place.
And we've not even come on to the KPIs, as Jamie puts it. So how are those New Zealand franchises rewarded? Where does that money go? Does that go back into New Zealand cricket, or does that go into the big bash coffers? What happens to the Super Smash? Is that generating revenue for New Zealand cricket? Where's the money flow? So there's just a lot of things to consider. I think the average punter would go, that would be great to see. The Auckland, I don't know. What would we call them? The Auckland Kakapos going over and playing in the going over and playing in the Big Bash. It would be great. It would be a great news story. It would be front page on the Herald. But I don't personally think it's got the legs until you can kind of figure out why you're doing it and how it affects your domestic game and the opportunities for those 66 players or 88 players or whatever it is across your existing provinces.
It probably just raises concerns as well around, player workload and consumer choice as well. And we've got the SA T20 now and PSL and, BSL, it's like there is so much out there. I mean, we were talking off air, weren't we, about, consumerism and so forth. But it's just crazy, isn't it, to try and keep a tab on this. And if you're a player, you're kind of trying to navigate that. If you've got an agent, they'll be farming you out to all of these franchises, and what is the long-term effect? But anyway, that's a different podcast. But.
That will be on our sister channel, the Tangent. But yes, any closing comments, boys, before we wrap up the pod for this week?
Oh, we've got to talk about Aussie Sri Lanka, don't we? We've got an actual Test series coming up, and so I think we've got to cover that. It's on your run sheet, Binksy. You just skip past it, I think.
He didn't want to talk about Australia too much, which is fair enough. I wouldn't want to either.
I told you this would go longer than 30 minutes. Right.
Well, the main question that I have for Baldy actually on this series is is really like, do you care? And not, I don't mean that in a sort of as bad as that question sounds, but I guess, unless Australia somehow bowls like 20 overs an hour, 20 overs in a day, over the course of these Test matches, they're in the World Test Championship final. Mm-hmm. Sri Lanka isn't in the World Test Championship final. We've got completely different conditions to what they'll face over in Lords. We've got Pat Cummins out. We've got Hazelwood out. We've got a lot of questions around Australia, like maybe what are they going to do? Sri Lanka's got a couple of injury niggles, although it seems like Nasanka Dhananjaya may be fit for that series. We'll see, in a couple of days what the lineup looks like. But yeah, sort of what are your levels of, how much you actually, I know you're always like, we've got to win every single game as an Australian, but how much are you actually is riding on the series for you?
This is still very important because we've got 2 more Test matches for Sam Constance to find actually some consistency in his level of performance. He was electric in his opening 60 and, he bashed a few around and got himself into a little bit of trouble in terms of, when to switch on and off his aggression. So there's some more international learnings for him. There is, and it actually becomes a question of who opens in that series.
Yeah, because I'd forgotten that Travis Head's been doing it, right?
Travis Head has been opening in Asia, and actually I think there is a sound piece of thinking in that you want Travis Head firing before all the spin comes on. If the ball is at all straight up and down or coming onto the bat, you want Travis Head there carving up. And, okay, Sam Constance can fill that role, but Usman Khawaja is a terrific player of spin, and he can start well against spin. So is there an opportunity to open with Head and Constance and go, right, okay, if we only get 12 overs of seam in this innings, let's try and get 75 runs in that 12 overs between Head and Constance, just going hammer and tongs at the top of the order. And then, maybe you drop Khawaja to 3 and Marnus to 5, or you drop Khawaja all the way down to number 5, and you've got your best 3 players of spin, I think, in Marnus, Smith and Khawaja in the engine room in the middle order that can all start against quality spin bowling. Then you've got the concept of, okay, does Bo Webster play in all conditions against Sri Lanka? And ostensibly the answer to that question is yes, because, on the face of it, batted really well against India in his first Test
in the team after that performance, doesn't he?
Can bowl seam up. So if you're going to bowl multiple spinners, and we'll talk about the makeup of the spin lineup, you got multiple spinners, and he can bowl a few dirty off breaks as he has done in Sheffield Shield cricket in Australia. But then you get into, okay, well, if he's at 6 and Carey's at 7, who are the 4 bowlers? And here's where it becomes certainly very interesting. And I want to open it up to what you guys feel. The options that Australia have available to them are Mitchell Starc, Scott Boland, Nathan Lyon. Then you've got Matthew Kuhnemann, who is battling an injury to his non-spinning thumb, who's had surgery on. He's trained apparently without pain, and he's ready to go over to Sri Lanka. Then you've got Sean Abbott, who's probably not going to feature, but could potentially feature if Australia are going to focus on, well, we need some batting at number 8, which then brings you on to the 21-year-old left-handed spinner, I'll use that term advisedly, Cooper Connolly, right, who is a prodigious talent, but still doesn't have a first-class wicket.
Yeah, he's not a spinner.
Doesn't have a first-class wicket. So before we get all excited about Cooper Connolly,
that makes no difference nowadays. You don't need wickets to get into international sides as a bowler.
You're absolutely right, Adam. But
they're not the currency. It's potential, and
Look, I love the little black book. I love potential. I love looking to the future. But I need him to get a first-class wicket before I put him in my Test side. Honestly, as a spit.
But he's a better,
20 wickets. How are we going to take 20 wickets with a guy who's never taken a wicket at first class level?
He's a batter, though, isn't he? If you're picking him to. I mean, look, I don't see a huge amount of the BBL. See bits and pieces. Seen him going there. Raj talks about him in glowing terms. That he's been far. Raj talks about him as far and away one of the best batters in the BBL.
He looks quality, but you've got Todd Murphy, you've got Kuhneman, you've got if you think it's going to spin, those are the guys that have got to play. If they're stacked aside with a guy that might bowl a few tweakers, I think that's wrong. Baldy, I'm just gonna disagree with one of your points and give you my hot take on this. I think
go for it, mate.
So I think from an opening the batting perspective, I think if I'm being brutally honest, this is a 2-test match series, which is pointless. We've talked about that a hell of a lot. I know that Pat Cummins is awaiting the birth of his second child, but he's not gone on the tour. That shows to me, and this is look, I don't want to open a big can of worms here, but we've seen this in a lot of recent times when guys are going to go off on parental leave. Typically, what they do is they go on tour and then they fly home the minute they need to. Pat Cummins, in my view, as an outsider looking in, has decided this isn't an important tour for Australia, and it's one that he can miss from a workload management perspective. It would be my take on it to an extent. Okay, so I think that just shows probably how importantly this is being viewed. I think as a look ahead to the Ashes and embedding your side for that, if you're doing that, right? I know England do. We plan for an Ashes 4 years away and forget the 3 years in between. But ultimately, if you've identified Constas as the guy that's going to open the batting, and you've identified that Usman Khawaja is going to be around this time next year in the Ashes, they need to get some kind of miles under their legs
agree.
As an opening partnership. And then you've again got to solve the problem of Travis Head and spin and all that. I don't know about the sort of horses for courses. Get a guy in when it's the right time for him, because he can only play seam and he needs to be in before that point. He's going to have to learn that skill set if he's going to be around for the next 4 or 5 years, which is good enough. Yeah, which is good enough to do. The final thing I'll just say, I actually think Sri Lanka are a red hot chance in this series. They've been
definitely
massively under the radar. I think we don't give them enough credit for I think how well they've played over the course of this World Test Championship cycle, and they've got some really exciting players that we have talked about as we particularly as we've talked about the white ball stuff. But yes, when you look at this Australia squad and when you look at the fact that it's a 2-test series, and you look at the fact that I even forgot it was on the run sheet, I think we really are looking at where this stands in the pantheon of importance of cricket at the moment. It isn't, it isn't from a neutral perspective at least, it isn't an important series, which is a shame.
I would disagree on Pat Cummins probably undervaluing it. Yeah, he's away because he's obviously pending the birth of a child, but
he's also got a bit of a niggle actually. He's there's doubts that he might not make the Champions Trophy. Although I would be surprised if he's not in that team. But yeah, there's doubts about that as well.
Yeah, and I think actually, if you're being strategic about this, is a good opportunity for from a leadership perspective to give people that opportunity. It's kind of contingency management.
It's not very Australian though, Jamie. The Australian captain is outside of the Prime Minister the most important person in Australia. That's what we're often told, right? So I'm just looking at it from that lens. Yeah. So that's my 2 cents. I it's an uninformed opinion. That's fine. I have lots of uninformed opinions.
But I don't think that model is sustainable in the current.
No, it's not.
World of cricket.
But
so
it's still their model.
I think having, but maybe this is a shift into the sand.
Yeah.
But I kind of look at it from I'd look at it, guys. It's not about importance. This is about future proofing. This is about looking forward to. Despite Australia probably not saying this, the Ashes, this will be about workload. It will be about rotation. It will be as well building for a legacy post Cummins. Who can step into that? All of those things, I think. But you're probably right. It isn't any of those things. It's about him just undervaluing the importance of it. So.
Well, if I can talk about, when New Zealand went there in terms of the bowling lineup, you talked about might be 12 overs of spin. That might be
overs of seam, you mean?
Or seam, yeah.
Cool.
That might be being ambitious, compared with what we sort of saw and the way that Sri Lanka sort of have built their side over over their home tests, particularly at Gaul. They're just dominant at Gaul. I am excited about watching.
It's a fortress.
Well, I am excited about watching 2 tests there again. I love that place, as a viewing experience. So I said before, I would love to watch a test there. That would be phenomenal. But I think, if we're talking about Cummins and Hazelwood and those kind of things, they're not going to play an important part. I think Stark
They're not
is
going to play any part.
Stark is your locked in bowler, and I think you're going, what do we do with our bowling? I think your question really is Stark. The way you get Connolly in is if you go, okay, well, we're just going to pick Stark, and we're going to have Webster open the bowling at the other end if we want to, and we're going to have, I hope it's Murphy. You said the Australian selectors probably want Koonman, but I really rate Murphy. I think he's looked really good, and in every time I've seen him, I know he's
the better bowler.
Yeah, and I know
he's bowling with the wrong hand.
Well, yeah, I know he's
for balance.
He's he's the Nathan Lyon successor. He's probably he's so similar to Lyon in a lot of ways that maybe they obviously do cross over, but I still think he's the best player to pick. But then if those guys are going to bowl the majority of the overs, that's where you get a Connolly in, and you can say, okay, well these guys are going to bowl all the overs. We can have 8 bat. We can bat down at 8. And we can get a guy in, and we can just bowl our guys.
Watch Baldy explode with this question. Doesn't Marnus bowl seamers?
Well,
he could take the shine off.
The bowling. Marnus could open the bowling.
I tell you what, if you want someone to take the shine off, Marnus is your man. He'll take that shine right off. Both sides.
He could bowl 135k bounces.
Only if we turn the speed gums up by about 15 k's an hour. I think Australia do have Travis Head, though.
Yeah.
He's a reasonable part-time, slightly better than part-time option. Bo Webster is obviously an all-rounder. We think he's probably more of a batting all-rounder than a bowling all-rounder, although he has succeeded at Sheffield Shield level as a bowler, and his average there and his strike rate there is good. The problem with picking Cooper Connolly to bat 8 and then bowl some dirty spin and maybe get a wicket is that then you're putting all of your workload on Stark, right? And Lyon and Murphy or Kuhneman, whoever it is. But you're effectively going, well, we've only got 3 bowlers. One of them is Stark, and he's going to have to do all the heavy lifting.
Yeah, he's going to bowl 6 overs in the day.
I think he's going to have to bowl more than that. I think Australia are going to have to find an answer to what happens when the ball is not swinging. In the middle overs between, 7 and 80, they're going to have to find an answer to that. That's not just, well, we're going to bowl 2 spinners until they both run themselves into the ground and then we'll find some part-timers here or there. I think they actually need a 4th bowler. I think they actually need a guy who can dry it up, who can bowl like Scott Boland does, put 90 balls in a shoebox in a spell, and ask those Sri Lankan batters to do something with that. I think the Sri Lankan batters are tremendously underrated, but they don't often get asked those kinds of questions by a bowler like Scott Boland. His record in Asia or his record outside of Australia isn't great. This is a unique opportunity for him to have an experience where he can do something about that, and he can show that when we go to India or we go to Pakistan, that he is a viable option for us and that we don't have to pick 3 spinners. As Raj said, you can only bowl 2 spinners at a time anyway. I would be picking the 2 best spinners. I'd be picking Murphy and Lyon because I think they are the best bowlers in the attack. I would pick Boland, I would pick Stark, and I wouldn't get too drastic in terms of selections. I wouldn't even change the batting order, to be fair. I know there's a lot of talk about Travis Head open the batting, all the rest of it, but that is your best side. Put your best side on the field and play cricket and adapt to the conditions that you need to adapt to. And I think that will be the mark of a truly great Australian side if they are able to do that and able to use the tools at their disposal to beat Sri Lanka in those conditions.
If they're able to beat Sri Lanka in this series, I will be very impressed. That they were a good unit, particularly at home.
Doubt.
And Jayasuriya, we've seen his record at home. It's remarkable. Kamindu Mendes in around his whole Test career, but particularly in Sri Lanka, he's been on fire. So yeah, they've got a lot of talent, and they'll back themselves at home. I think if Australia go and win this series, it's going to give them. I mean, they're going to go into World Test Championship with a huge amount of confidence anyway. But if they can go over there and win, then yeah.
Yep. Couple of free hits for Australia to find some combinations and most importantly for some of their batters to get some runs and get some scores, which will be difficult in the conditions that they're going to be presented with.
Fantastic. Well, we squeezed it in to the pod and squeezed it in under the hour mark. I'm actually looking forward to watching a bit of this series. I love watching cricket at Gaul. Even on the TV, you kind of get that atmosphere, don't you? So, looking forward to trying to find a legal and paid for way of viewing that cricket here in the UK with the 17 subscriptions required to do so. But that is all we've got time for on the Top Order podcast this week. We will, of course, be back in your feed to wrap up a number of the games that we've talked about and also announce of course, the naming of the New Zealand franchise into the BBL at some point as well. I'm sure we'll get that memo. But for now, it is good night and God bless from us here at the Top Order podcast. We'll see you next week. Good night.